Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's Master Instructor Roundtable. I am Wendy Batts, here with my friend and co-host, Dr. Marty Miller. Marty, how are you?
Wendy, I'm doing well. How about yourself today?
I am doing very, very well. I think today's topic is super important. I know, Marty, you and I both get this question a lot on, I don't know how to change my workouts. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right reps and sets and all that fun stuff. So today we are going to talk about the importance of acute variables and making sure people feel comfortable when designing programs, especially the whys. Why do we do what we're going to do? And why do we have this rep range and all that fun stuff? We're going to cover it all today.
Yeah, the acute variables are the secret sauce behind the programs. You could have a program laid out on paper well with your exercise selection. You correlated that to their movement compensations. But if you do not follow the program based on which phase of training that you're working in with the acute variables as written in the NASM text, you're not going to get the same outcome. It's like cooking a recipe with the wrong ingredients. It's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and NASM did all the work for you. So it's really just opening your book and then just learning as you go.
Simple.
Yep. So today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to define the acute variables. We want everyone to make sure when we talk about these that everyone feels comfortable about like what we're talking about. This matters in your program design. So we're going to tell you why it matters, and we're going to talk through every bit of it, especially throughout each phase and what makes everything different. And then, of course, each different phase you get into has a unique set of acute variables for a reason. And it wasn't some random numbers that were made up. There's actual percentages of your 1 rep max, or what would be equivalent to someone's estimated 1 rep max, of how these numbers were found and why they were put into the model in the actual phase that they are. But then most importantly, just know your purpose, have fun with your programs, and let's kind of get started and talk through each one.
Love it. So first and foremost, let's talk about what acute variables are, so we're on the same page. So these are the critical or important components that specify how much or how each exercise is to be performed, also known as exercise training variables. So this is anything in a program that can be manipulated, changed, progressed, regressed, and then that's what truly changes a program. It's the sets, it's the reps, it's the rest intervals, your time under tension. All of these key components will elicit very specific physiological outcomes if you follow them correctly.
Yeah, and I think this is where people tend to go wrong. You'll go to the gym, you do the exact same exercise for the exact same reps each and every time. Everyone's just doing everything fast. And so I think that's what makes us as personal trainers unique, because we put tempos to everything. We are really focusing on certain components of each and every full repetition that you do. Again, in the very beginning, we talk about the eccentric contraction and doing things very slowly and making sure that you're remaining in your 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. If any of those things are going wrong and there's no purpose behind what you're doing, are you really going to achieve a very specific outcome? And I think this is where the SAID principle comes into play, which just means, you get what you train for. Whatever that demand is that you're placing on the body, your body will elicit change. But then over time, if you don't change things, there's no changes that are going to happen. That just becomes your new norm and what your body gets accustomed to.
Yeah, and the phases of training are laid out in a progressive manner on purpose. You have to create stability on fundamentally sound movement. Then you can load it with strength, and then you can load it with power. So that's why it is in that manner. So don't jump around. Make sure you go through the model and then the acute variables as they've been laid out.
So it's important, obviously, thinking about each and every bit of what you're designing. So think about being creative in your program, because if it's fun, if it's something that your client's a part of, that's why there's the client choice. That's going to help with retention, because the client came to you with a very hopefully specific goal, especially if you went through the SMART goals. And so you know exactly what they're hoping to achieve. And then you know, based on the assessment, where they're starting from. So you have a very good idea based on how the body starts to adapt every 4 to 6 weeks to the demand that you're placing on it, how long they can successfully get to a certain point in the model to achieve that specific goal. So when you're doing the program, if you're following the acute variables per phase that we're going to cover, then there are going to be very specific prime movers that you're working along with the stabilizers to support that prime mover and make sure that the joint is moving optimally. So therefore we don't have any later issues. And also too, just think about the phases of training. Each one of them has a specific goal. So yes, we have stabilization, strength, and power, but what are they trying to achieve within each one? And then just make sure that if you're following the acute variables, the way that they're written, which is based off of research, then you know that you at least are getting your client prepared for the next level or next phase of training, if that is something that they're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, we cover it in the book, the SAID principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands. If you move slow, you'll be slower. If you move fast, you'll be faster. But that doesn't mean I just want you to go out there and just pick a goal and then try to emulate that. Go back to what I said earlier, that you have to do these in a progressive manner to get the best outcome.
Yes.
There you go. So if we look here at a stabilization endurance phase 1, right? For a lot of you, you may have your corrective exercise specialist as well. So of course, that underlies under all of this. If you have not taken your corrective exercise specialist, yes, we highly encourage you to do so, because when Wendy and I learned this, there were 7 phases in the model. And truly, you could still say there are 7 phases. 2 of them have been broken out into their own credential because there's so much material. So corrective exercise, if you're coming in from that background, we're not skipping that today. We're starting right here in the OPT model with phase 1 or stabilization endurance. And then also don't forget, we have our PES as a bookend to the corrective exercise specialist for our high level performance. So when you look at stabilization endurance, what are the goals? Well, first and foremost, it's going to teach ideal movement patterns and skills. It's going to be, as I always say, move well. Then you can increase your flexibility and your joint mobility for those areas that have been targeted in your movement assessments that maybe you have some restriction or faulty movement patterns, or your 5 kinetic chain checkpoints aren't in order. Without a doubt, we're going to be correcting muscle imbalances, increase joint and core stability, increasing that postural awareness, as I like to say it. So that way, as you start to move load in other phases, you're doing it already with proper posture. No question, you're going to see a muscular endurance and aerobic capacity here. We're looking at 12 to 20 repetitions, high volume, lower intensity, but that will get those type 1 muscle fiber types going, as well as for certain people that will definitely be aerobic in nature. Enhances proprioception, or your body's ability to know where it is in space. We're bringing in balance and different coordination type of patterning. And then without a doubt, promotes confidence and adherence. But I also like it because it's a great entry point into fitness for those people who have not worked out before. So they're not going to go right into a muscular development or hypertrophy phase, get sore, get injured. And then it's a perfect phase to transition after 8 to 12 weeks of more intense training as you progress through the model.
Yes. And as you can see, when you talked about the acute variables, remember, that's anything that's changing. So Marty, you mentioned it. You're doing higher reps, 12 to 20 reps. Now, when we say that, you're doing 1 to 3 sets. So if you're going to do 20 repetitions, I don't suggest doing 3 sets of 20. At that point, you would probably just reverse it and do 3 sets of 12. And so you want to be smart. The reason why there's 1 set to 3 is if someone is brand new to exercise and they're trying to learn a movement pattern, repetitive movement is going to help them learn it. Yes. But you also don't want to take them and make them so exhausted, especially if they haven't done something before. So use 1 set maybe as your training tool. And maybe you do 1 set of everything just to introduce the body to certain movement patterns. And maybe they are pretty weak. They don't have the endurance to do 3 sets. So again, this is where the creativity in your training comes into play, and everything's going to be moved at a slower tempo. So remember, when we say 4, 2, 1, 0, the eccentric contraction comes first. That means, like, for example, in a bicep curl, for example. The eccentric would be if my arms are up and I'm bringing them back towards the ground. So that would take 4 seconds to do that. Then the isometric contraction, there's no movement whatsoever. So you can pause at the bottom for 1 or pause at the bottom for 0, whatever fits best for you. And then, or I'm sorry, for 3 seconds or 2 seconds. And then you would come up in the concentric contraction for 1, and then maybe not stop and then repeat. So again, that's where the 4-2-1 tempo comes down. So I would go down for 4, I would hold at the bottom or at the top for 2, and then come up for 1. So the 1 or the 2 and the 0, they can be placed either way, because again, there's no movement at the top and there's no movement at the bottom. So that's why there's 4 now tempos, versus back in the day when Marty and I learned it, there was only 3. So we went 3-2-1 or down and then up. And we did not do the last one. And so oftentimes I know when Marty and I write a program, we usually put 0 in the end because we still don't stop. We just keep going. But I think the tempos are really something that I know and what I've seen from other trainers, something that just gets ignored. But to me is that's what makes the exercises different throughout each phase. So we use a push-up throughout all 7 phases. But what can make it different is the tempo and how you're performing it. And so I think if we can just take a step back and really focus on getting your tempos right and make sure that they can successfully do the rep range that you're asking from 12 to 20 without compensation, then you're going to lead them to that stabilization endurance goal that will help them move up into strength successfully.
Yeah, great points. And for all of you joining us today on the Master Instructor Roundtable, I'm Marty Miller here with Wendy Batts, and we're talking about acute variables. As we'll say many times, kind of the secret sauce that brings all of these programs to life and makes them very challenging and oftentimes very humbling. So then, Wendy, I'll jump in here first and we'll see what you think here as we talk about the strength levels. So there's 3 different levels of strength, right? So we have stabilization, which I talked about, where we're looking at improving human movement, muscular endurance, posture, learning movement patterns. Well, now it's time to do that under load. So here the overall goals in this block of training would be to increase the ability of the core to stabilize the pelvis and spine under heavier loads, whatever is appropriate, of course, through available range of motion, increase the load-bearing capabilities of the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, and the joints, increase the overall volume of training. So as Wendy said, you might start with 1 set, maybe get to 3. Here, the person should have been in a stabilization endurance program for 3 to 4, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. So now they're ready for an increased volume, especially with that increased load. Without a doubt, it will increase the metabolic demand within the energy systems, and then increase recruitment of more motor units to overcome that external load. That's the max strength. So what we mean by that is a motor unit is going to be an all or none. It either fires or it doesn't fire. So when we get to max strength, more of the muscle units will fire because you're picking up something heavier. If I went to pick up this and every muscle fired, boom, off it goes against the wall. So that's where, as we progress, we're starting to challenge more of the muscular, motor units to fire. That's why we increase the load.
Yes. So then when we think about, phase 3, we're thinking about muscular development. So in phase 2, as Marty just said, when we were looking at going from 1 to 3, we're looking for strength endurance in phase 2. And that's where that superset comes into play. And so I think that's one of the things that when you're thinking of a superset, we're doing the same muscle movement pattern, going from strength, example, a chest press would be a bench chest into maybe something that's unstable. So that slow push up even on the floor. So it doesn't have to be anything too crazy. It's not like, oh, you're on a ball and doing all these weird things. If that's not what's appropriate, you want it to be very challenging. But like I said, you could take that push up and do a 4-2-1 tempo in phase 1. Now you're doing the stabilization component of the superset in phase 2 at a 3-2-1. Well, look at that phase 2 as kind of like a blend into now the muscular development that you see up here on the screen. So depending on your when you learned and took your CPT, some people knew phase 3 back in the day when we first started as muscular development. Then in different editions, we learned it as hypertrophy. Well, then in the latest edition, we put it back to muscular development. And not to confuse people, But the thing is muscular development is just that, muscular development. One of the goals of muscular development is going to be hypertrophy training. And this is going to, again, have higher levels of volume to force. So therefore, we're seeing the cellular changes in the muscle. We're starting to see growth. Now, that scares people when they have a female that they're like, I don't want to get big and bulky. You're not going to get big and bulky unless you feed your body to be big and bulky and then start to move yourself up into even higher volume of training. So when you're looking at phase 3, you're defining the muscle, you're building strength, you are building a really good base of strength changes, because it will increase the stress on your aerobic and anaerobic energy systems. But as you can see here, you're going to want to look at your rest periods, and you're also going to think too, what's the tempo here? Because you're lifting more load, it's going to be a faster movement pattern, but it's also going to be definitely more of a struggle.
No, great points. And again, there's nothing wrong with moving towards this phase, even if it's for a little bit of time, because Wendy, you and I have done a bunch of podcasts on this about the aging athlete, things like that, that sarcopenia, where your body's trying to lose muscle mass as you get older. It's going to be beneficial to spend time in either phase 2 and maybe even for a period of time in phase 3, just to maintain that muscle mass. Even if it's only for a week or two, maybe it's one cycle through, or maybe one day a week in your training cycle, just to be able to maintain some of that healthy tissue. Remember, that increases metabolism, burns calories.
Yes, it does. Starts to see the changes.
Yeah. So now here's the phase that I grew up in initially, phase 4. How much weight could you lift? Right back in the day, everyone said, "What can you bench press?" So you could tell that the few phases getting to this point. So here, the overall goals is focusing on lifting a heavier load near intensity. You get some play here, right? For somebody that isn't competing, isn't really a Division I athlete, elite athlete. Maybe their max is 5 to 7, 8 reps. That's fine. But by definition, it's going to be that, 1 to 5 repetition. So increase the benefit of power training. Should cycle through the phase 1 to 3 to ensure that proper movement pattern. Shocking that we're going to tie it back to following the entire model. So when you look at the acute variables, this increases loaded number of sets. The reps decrease, right? Most people are between that 1 and 5 range. Again, you have a little play there. Rest increases because you need full recovery of your ATP. So when someone says they're, lifting heavy and they're at 30 to 45 second rest, they're not lifting as heavy as they could go. We have a phase where we do more metabolic conditioning with sub-maximal loads with that rest interval, but this is not that. Here, this is where maybe, like you see people nowadays, sometimes on their cell phone, hanging out for 2 to 5 minutes. That's what we're looking at, is a full recovery, because you're truly testing your body to its maximum efforts. So the tempo here is X, 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 X. What that means is I can't tell you exactly how fast you're going to move the bar. You're trying to move it explosively, but because the load is so heavy, you're not going to see a rapid acceleration of the object, the bar, etc. So that's where there's not a specific time on it. It's just get under that bar, pick up that heavy object, and move it as fast as you can, knowing that's going to take you some time to move that through the range of motion.
Yeah, and I want to step back too and say that phases 3 and 4 are optional phases. Now, I personally think 3 is good for everyone for the reasons that we just talked about. 4, I also agree, is important if you're going to move them to power, which everybody needs some sort of power. However, when you're thinking about truly getting to max strength, that 1 to 5 repetition is important. And so if you are really trying to get that goal and you're training someone for the combines, or you're training someone for, where they're going to go into Olympic lifting and powerlifting, and you want them to achieve their maximum strength, if they can get to 6 repetitions, it's too light. And that's what people sometimes have struggle understanding, is when we say that we want you to do 1 to 5 repetitions, under your book and under the category right there, you're going to see different intensities, and it'll say 85% to 100%. And again, that means if you could only do 1 rep, that's 100% of what you possibly can do. That's 100% of your 1 rep max. So if you can do 5 of them and it's challenging, but you're not breaking your form, that's about 85% of your 1 rep max. And so we did all of the percentages for you, and that's how those rep ranges came into play. And so it wasn't that we just made it up and we're like, oh, let's just go less. Oh, let's do this. That intensity and that percentages is what dictates those rep ranges that are given to you. And it's very important that you have that goal. And if you say 5, they can do 6, make it harder. If you say 5 and they can't even do 3, it's too heavy. And at that point, lighten the load a little bit until they can get to whatever number you're asking them to achieve. And then at that point, go lower into it until you can truly get them safely to a 1 rep max.
And that goes for all the phases of training, right? If it's 12 to 20 and you could do 25, it's not the right load. If you can only do 8 and you're supposed to do 12, it's not the right load. Remember, these are designed for specific physiological outcomes. So Wendy, great point on this phase, but that goes for all the phases. You've got to be at that level of fatigue. Now, we'll give some grace for the very first time someone walks in a gym. We're talking about someone that's conditioned and trained and ready to go and elicit a level of fatigue at that number. But if you still have gas in the tank, you're not going to get the same benefits as if you follow that rep range.
100%. So then we get into power. Now, again, you're going to think if they had never went through, because phase 4 is optional, if they never went through a phase 4 workout, and then now you're asking them to follow the acute variables and do a power phase, that is extremely, extremely challenging. And so when we say that 3 and 4 are optional, they really are, because what is it that the client's trying to achieve? However, everybody needs power, because you want to think that you have to move for the speed of life. If a light is turning yellow and you're crossing the street, you've got to run quickly across the street. If you see someone that is in trouble, and let's say it's a kid, and you need to quickly pick them up to move them somewhere to get them out of harm's way, you've got to be able to do that quickly. And your body needs to be able to safely respond to those types of activities of just life. And so is it okay if you have someone that is in their 70s that is going to do a true phase 5 power? Absolutely, if you train them correctly throughout the model to prepare their body to lift that type of load. However, if you did not put them through 3 and 4, and you're going from that superset in phase 2 now to a superset in phase 5, you may have to wiggle the numbers a little bit, especially if you're working with maybe an active older adult. And you may have them lift as heavy as they can for 8 repetitions versus just 5, if it makes more sense. However, you truly want to get power, so then you can go into our PES and train for max power. Then you want to follow these acute variables as closely as you can, which means that superset is a blend from strength into power, leading to max power. So your ultimate goal hopefully will be max power if you want to go through those all 7 phases that Marty talked about. So here we're increasing the rate of force productions, or the speed of that muscle contraction. And remember that the definition of power is force times velocity. So we're using superset. It is a strength. Again, 1 to 5 repetitions, as hard and as heavy as you can possibly lift with ideal form. And then immediately doing something to mimic the same movement power as fast as they possibly can with control. And then you want to rest 1 to 2 minutes and then repeat. So again, can you put a tempo on either one of those? The answer is no, because we don't know how fast that person can lift that heavy load. And we don't know how fast someone's speed is, especially when they start. We want it to be exceptionally fast where we couldn't put a tempo on it. But that's what all of these X's mean. It didn't mean like they're not important and we just didn't put, we're not putting anything in there for a reason. It's that we honestly can't, because everyone's strength and speed is going to be different based on what the load they're lifting.
Yeah, great examples there, Wendy. I think it's critically important to understand that the goal should be to get people appropriately and safely to a level 5 workout. And again, you may just pick totally different exercises if you're dealing with the more senior athlete than, a professional athlete. That's fine. But just get them to express strength and get them to express power within the safest level that they can, where their 5 kinetic chain checkpoints are in order, and you will see tremendous results, and people will love this type of workout. They have fun with it, and it's great metabolically as well.
Who doesn't like to throw things around?
Right? Hit things.
Especially if you don't have a wall and they're throwing it at your trainer. That makes it even more fun for some of your clients too.
Without a doubt. So when we look at the key takeaways, shocker, once again, assessments are going to be key to knowing the proper phase for each client, as well as how they're moving, et cetera. That's always going to be the case with anything we do. Of course, follow the model. We did the work for you. NASM took the guesswork out. That's why you've got to go in that, that periodization model that we have. We've done podcasts on how you can then manipulate it and undulate it through each phase differently during training cycles. But first time through, follow the model, follow those acute variables, and then you've got an evidence-based approach to doing it. Be creative, be smart. I just talked about what one client may have, may be totally different than somebody else, but I'm still following the acute variables. Then observe your client's 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, right? As you start to handle more stress, whether it's longer, whether it's more load or at higher speed, sometimes those little things will show up that you saw in their movement assessment, right? So you've got to be aware of those no matter what phase of training, and then absolutely have fun with it.
Yep. If you're not having a good time, it's not fun for you or the client. But again,
Right.
Be safe and smart. So
Without a doubt.
Yep. So if you guys have any questions about any of the acute variables, again, it takes time and practice. You do have to have some memorization in the beginning, but just realize that if you look at the intensity and you start thinking through the repetition range, you're going to understand why those numbers are what they are. If you also think about, okay, what does the tempo mean? Know your prime movers, know what that muscle is supposed to do, and eccentrically focus on that in phase 1. And I'm telling you, when you get into more of the strength phases, because you spent so much time on the eccentric time under tension component, you're going to be a lot stronger, or they will be a lot stronger when they get into the strength, because their body already knows how to move at a faster pace. But you're also ensuring that the stabilizers are dialed in. You've got good alignment throughout the joint. The prime mover is doing what it's intended to do without compensation. So it really makes a big difference. So just know and go through all of that. However, if you have questions, Marty and I are always available. You can email me here at wendy.batts@nasm.org, or you can find me on Instagram at wendy.batts13.
And here's my contact information, dr.martymiller72, and email marty.miller@nasm.org. Well, Wendy, thank you for bringing this up. I know that you were the one contacting on this question, so I appreciate you responding to our awesome NASM family member that wrote that in, and then bringing this to light here for our podcast today. Thank you for all that joined today. And without a doubt, we look forward to seeing you on next week's Master Instructor Roundtable.